The Spyro series is a series that I find a lot of people overlook on YouTube, only being reviewed by those with some nostalgic attachment towards the game or something. And even when people give a fair assessment of the franchise, they only stick to the classics, for very good reasons, mind you. But today I wanted to do something a bit more unique. I'm going to review every single game in the Spyro series, including the GBA games, the Legend of Spyro titles, and even Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. Consider this a Spyro retrospective, as I'll be comparing each title as we go along to the past installments, in addition to giving each game a close review. If you've seen my video on the Spyro franchise as a whole, then you most likely already know my general opinions on the series. That being said, I intend to give every game here a fair, unbiased chance in each video I make. I should also mention that in this particular video, there will be some major spoilers. So be aware of those major spoilers, and without further ado, let's kick this marathon off with the first game in the series, aptly titled Spyro the Dragon. Developed by Insomniac Games, Spyro 1 was released on the PlayStation 1 in 1998 to pretty much unanimous critical acclaim. Everyone seemed to love this purple dragon, and he soon gained a huge following of fans. Due to his overwhelming popularity, he quickly became one of Sony's star mascots, next to Crash Bandicoot. Personally, my affinity to Spyro didn't begin until I started playing the third game in the early 2000s, but right after that I joined the thousands of fans who adored this franchise. And replaying it these past few weeks was kind of surreal. I wasn't feeling any nostalgia, instead I felt a sort of childlike wonder. But before I can explain this, let's get the story out of the way. The plot opens up with a bunch of dragons being interviewed on live television by an unnamed news team about, well, I guess life in general. The thing is, there is never really a purpose for this news team to be here. A dragon elder is talking about peace and treasure. That's it. But it doesn't seem very newsworthy by any stretch of the imagination. But then the news interviewer, for what seems like no reason at all, asks the dragons about someone named Nasty Nork, to which the dragons respond with insults about him. They slander him on live television, calling him ugly and saying he doesn't have any friends in the Dragon Kingdom. So Nasty Nork unleashes a spell that turns all the dragons, except for one, into stone, and rightfully so. I mean, they just bashed him live to possibly hundreds of viewers. I would be angry too if someone did that to me. The game tries to make Nasty look like the villain here, but I would say the dragons are the actual villains. They start this whole conflict by insulting him for no reason, and they get turned to stone because of it. It's like the saying goes, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Anyways, this purple dragon named Spyro, who somehow survived the attack, springs into action, and as the title card says, the adventure begins. Now, this is pretty much the bulk of the story that's present in the game. I would say the intro cutscene does a decent job setting everything up and giving the player a reason to go on an adventure. Something worth mentioning here though is the amount of personality in this game. Everything is filled to the brim with charm and character. Even when you're not in cutscenes, the enemies feel lifelike and even run away from Spyro in fear. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like these enemies are enemies, as they never really do much wrong. It seems like Spyro is the biggest antagonist here. He murders sheep, he kills defenseless Norks, and he destroys virtually everything in his path. Only after later playthroughs did this become more apparent, but even then, this is a subtle yet great detail. It shows just how much thought Insomniac put into their game and how much they did to make Spyro 1 feel distinct. The voice acting is also generally good throughout. And if I didn't know any better, I would say the cast of voice actors is pretty expansive. It feels like almost every one of the 80 dragons has a different voice to them, which helps breathe life into the world. Despite some of the repeated lines becoming really cheesy, I still like that after you free a dragon from stone, they have some advice or quirky lines to tell Spyro.
The enemies here can be quite frightening, but you should watch the fools.
I'd rather flame the fools.
Now you're thinking.
But by far the best interactions here are when the Elder Dragons want to tell Spyro a story, and Spyro responds with some really rude comment about how boring it will be.
After you freed all the dragons, pass through this fancy vortex thingamajigger. It'll take you back to the artisan home. But first let me tell you a story.
No thanks. See ya.
Spyro's characterization as a snotty, vain brat makes for some entertaining and funny dialogue. I love how snarky Spyro can get and how fresh he is to his elders. It gives the impression that Spyro is that rebellious teenager everyone can relate to. The only downside to Spyro is that I'm not a huge fan of his voice acting. Spyro sounds really congested and it makes his overall performance worse.
What about Nasty Nork? I'm going after him. I'm going after him.
I'm going after him.
Now, this is nothing against Carlos Alazraqui, but I personally prefer Tom Kenny as the voice for Spyro. In this game, Spyro's prepubescent voice sounds a bit forced, but it's not enough to make me hate Spyro entirely. After all, it's still tolerable, and at least it's not as bad as his voice work in Skylanders. But other than Spyro, no other characters are developed in the game. Nasty Nork is the stereotypical villain who really doesn't seem like a villain, and the dragons are just one-note characters, if you can even call them that. No, the main focus of Spyro 1 is the gameplay. Essentially, Spyro the Dragon is a 3D platformer slash collectathon, and it obviously stars our main protagonist Spyro alongside his best friend Sparks. In the first game, Spyro controls decently well. He's a dragon, so he breathes fire, can glide around after a jump, and charges at enemies with his horns. I really like Spyro's moveset here. It's simple and it makes for easy control. Also, gliding provides some ease with platforming if you feel like you might not land a jump or something. And when combating enemies, Spyro can torch them with fire or just plain charge into them. On the off chance Spyro does get hit, he has his buddy Sparks to alleviate the pain. Sparks allows Spyro to take up to 4 hits, and each time Spyro gets hit, Sparks will change color, indicating how many more hits Spyro can take. Once Sparks is gone, Spyro is on his last hit, which makes you, the player, more cautious when controlling Spyro, because you obviously don't want to die. But if and when you do die, you're sent back to the last dragon you saved and get to keep any treasure or items you may have collected, which, let me just say, is a fantastic design choice. This allows Spyro the Dragon to become more streamlined. Also, his moveset allows for some distinctive level design and platforming, which makes Spyro the Dragon stand out from the abundance of 3D platformers of this era. And what a great 3D platformer Spyro is. See, the game is divided into 6 different worlds: the Artisans, the Peacekeepers, the Magic Crafters, the Beastmakers, the Dreamweavers, and Nasties. And each world has 6 different stages you can traverse through to beat the game. To travel between these worlds, you have to accomplish a certain task laid out by the balloonist in each world, whether that be retrieving 5 dragon eggs or rescuing 50 dragons. But you don't necessarily have to play through each level to fulfill these objectives, so basically a lot of the levels are optional. This is pretty standard stuff for most collectathon platformers, but it applies more so to Spyro 1 than other platformers. However, the real value of Spyro 1 comes from trying to fully complete it by freeing all the dragons, finding all the dragon eggs, and locating all of the stolen treasure. If you don't go after that, then Spyro 1 is a relatively short experience. In fact, I would say the whole point of certain design choices here is to 100% this title. I feel like that's what the developers wanted you to do, and by attempting that, you will easily quadruple your playtime. That's where a lot of Spyro 1's difficulty comes from. If I was just casually going through each level, collecting gems when I saw them and not actively seeking out certain objects, then I would have no trouble at all finishing the stage. But the point of each level is not to get to the end goal, it's to explore the level to get whatever the balloonist needs. Just getting to the end of a stage will get you nowhere in terms of progression. Thus, each stage is very non-linear. You don't go from point A to point B to beat the game, but rather you have to look out for branching pathways, places you could glide to get off the beaten path, and you have to keep fighting and killing every enemy you come across. Like I said before, this causes Spyro to become more of a collectathon than a true 3D platformer. But I really like these design choices. Sometimes levels will have a set path you need to go through, but will also have some parts parts that you have to explore the level to discover. Take Town Square for example. To get to the end, all you have to do is follow a set path and glide to raised areas every now and again. But once you reach the end, you'll realize you're lacking a dragon egg, a dragon elder, and a couple of gems. Oh, and just a quick side note, I really like how upon pausing the game, you can see how many objects you have left in an area to collect to fully complete it. It makes 100%ing this game more streamlined than it would otherwise. Anyways, at this point in Town Square, you have to climb up to an area, glide around an archway, and reach another area that you wouldn't expect to have anything on it. This is actually where the rest of those items are hidden. Components like these make every level really interesting, fun, and sometimes challenging to explore. At times, finding the last items you need can seem like a chore, but the levels are small enough to where finding them doesn't take long at all. The only level that it was actually frustrating to get 100% in was Treetops, and anyone who has ever attempted to 100% this title definitely knows what I'm talking about. So in the beginning, there's this green bandit that starts running away from you, and if you follow him, you'll see him make some really bizarre jumps to get to an area far away from the main area. The problem here is that I, like probably a lot of other players, didn't originally try to chase the guy down. I was too busy killing the other enemies and collecting gems to see him at first. So that led to about 20 minutes of frustration trying to find him, the gems, and Dragon Elder he was near on that platform way off in the distance. Only after looking up a walkthrough did I discover the difficult maneuver you had to pull off while doing a supercharge. Without pursuing the green guy right away, there is virtually no way you could have seen that you had to do this. Even then, this was the only level out of 36 that I had trouble in, and that's a great feat for Spyro 1. Every other level has pretty easy to find secrets, so the pacing of the game never slows down. That's another part of the game I love, its fast pacing. Navigating the worlds, going from stage to stage, and just moving around in general is fairly quick. It makes platforming and exploring fun, as the time you spend waiting around is practically non-existent. The only real loading times here are when you go from the overworld to a stage and vice versa. But even then, it's kind of entertaining to wait around. I mean, you get to see the treasure you've collected get deposited into a large chest, which might not sound astounding to you, but after I collected a bunch of gems and saw them in a huge mass getting put into a chest, I felt really satisfied. Plus, I really like the animation where Spyro flies into the air to his destination. It makes it feel like the worlds are truly interconnected and are real places you can travel to. Unlike Super Mario 64, where you just jumped into a fantasy painting, jumping into the sky and seeing Spyro land in a certain area gives the world depth. I cannot praise this aspect of Spyro 1 enough. Building a world the player can feel immersed in is something that can really set your game apart from others, and Spyro 1 did this almost flawlessly during its time period. To me, that's what made it feel so special and engrossing. Not to mention, each overworld kind of felt like its own stage with secrets and gems to boot. And like I said before, each overworld contains 6 unique stages, which consist of regular platforming-centric stages, a boss stage, and an obligatory flight stage. I would first like to say these dang flight levels are really not that bad. They're actually pretty linear and don't require too much thought or effort aside from maybe the last 2 stages. I mean, a lot of the time there'll be arrows telling you where to go, and a set path the game recommends you take to get the most optimal time. So these stages are the farthest thing from frustrating. Sure, they could be deemed as uninteresting since they kind of discourage going off the beaten path, but they serve as a simple distraction from platforming and are quite enjoyable. Plus, they are optional for non-completionists, so they're harmless. Although, I would recommend you play through them because I had a lot of fun flying around going through these obstacle courses. The platforming stages are what make up most of the game though, and like I said before, I enjoyed pretty much all of them. Each stage always implements something new and tries to make itself different from the others. No matter what world the stage is in, you can always expect something new every time you enter an archway. You could enter a deserted desert town, or a stark icy cavern, or even a stage built entirely in a harbor or battleships. Not only are these stage themes really distinct, but the level design never gets repetitive. Sometimes there are bottomless pits everywhere, and other times you're in a grassy coastal area with only pathetic enemies to threaten you. The variety here is amazing, and it's this diversity that prevents Spyro 1 from ever getting boring or tedious. I had a lot of fun in just about about every level I played, and I was always pushed by smart level design to keep exploring and to 100% this title. Spyro 1 is one of the few games that actually encourages you to explore the stage thoroughly, as it has perfect stage size and length. I cannot emphasize enough how well done each level is. Not to mention the power-ups Spyro gets along the way, like the Supercharge, which allows him to go, well, super fast to break through enemies and barriers, and the Super Flame, which allows Spyro to obliterate everything. These power-ups serve as a way to spice up the gameplay every now and again, and are usually well implemented into each stage they're present in. Then there are the boss stages, which are the most disappointing thing about the game. They're really easy and have attack patterns a baby could decipher. And sometimes I was left saying, wait, was that a boss fight? Because they don't really feel like boss fights. They more so feel like glorified enemies, and while some boss fights like Metalhead feel somewhat challenging and engaging, the majority don't feel thrilling in the slightest. Part of this stems from the generic arenas each boss is located in, as the stages feel relatively uninspired. You would think that each boss would have some distinct locale like Metalhead does, but unfortunately bosses like Toasty, Jocks, and Blowhard are just boring. And spoiler alert, not even the final boss is that fun to battle against, but more on that later. The stages overall are pretty enjoyable to play through, but some problems do stand out in the gameplay department here. For one thing, the camera, from my experience, is kind of wonky and awkward. And don't get me wrong, navigating a game with a camera that is bound to the back triggers can be perfectly fine, but sometimes the camera just doesn't cooperate with me. There will be times when I want it to go at one angle, but then it won't move there or stay there. But for most of the time, the camera works well enough. It's certainly not ideal, but it's tolerable. The other problem I have is that the game is pretty short and not too challenging. Nothing about it is really that difficult, and when you don't strive to fully complete the game, Spyro 1 will not take you much time at all. For some, I guess that would make it kind of boring, but for me, striving to collect everything prevented the length and lack of any challenge from becoming that big of an issue. See, the game's difficulty mostly sticks to one consistent easy level throughout, which could have been easily remedied by scaling the difficulty near the end. But I guess for the first game in the series, and one of the first from Insomniac, I can excuse this minor flaw. The only other nitpick I have is that controlling with the D-pad after being accustomed to so many years of playing 3D games with an analog stick feels weird, but there's nothing the game could have done to fix this hardware limitation, so I can't really criticize Spyro 1 for that. If anything, the developers worked around this flaw by adding larger areas that you have to platform to and making the margin for error pretty high. And with all that gameplay stuff out of the way, what about the presentation? Well, I'll say right now that this is easily the best looking game of 1998, I think. While some level geometry looks low poly and jagged, I still don't really mind it. I think a lot of the textures look pretty great, and I especially love how well designed the enemies are. They have a lot of charm and expression to them. Not to mention, the variety in graphical styles is spectacular. Plus, Spyro's character model, along with Sparks, looks really good. And the game has aged pretty well by today's standards, at least a lot better than Mario 64 did. The only thing wrong that I can see is that the lip syncing for certain characters looks a bit awkward. Also, the soundtrack is really good. The music is catchy and sounds really unique. Stuart Copeland did an amazing job making Spyro 1's soundtrack feel upbeat and atmospheric. While not a lot of songs are really memorable, they still are a joy to listen to as a distraction or as background noise when writing a review about Spyro the Dragon. I suggest you all go pick any track from this game and give it a good listen. There is not one track here that stands out as bad or mediocre. They're all wonderful. Now, what about that ending? This should go without saying, but spoiler alert, this is your one and only warning if you care about preserving the great mystery behind the ending of Spyro 1. As always, I'll be putting the time you should skip to if you wish to avoid these spoilers, so anyways, here we go. So if you couldn't have guessed, the final boss is Nasty Nork, and well, it's pretty easy. Not only that, but it doesn't feel like a boss fight at all. Much like the early game bosses, Nasty Nork is really just a glorified standard enemy. You basically have to complete certain objectives, chase him down, breathe fire on him, and rinse and repeat. Plus, the fight itself is really short, even when you are going for that pressure precious 100%. And after Nasty Nork is burned to death rather anticlimactically, Spyro is interviewed by the newscast and the game just ends. Honestly, this ending is a bit disappointing. You kill Nasty Nork for almost no reason at all, and then Spyro acts like a vain brat once again while being interviewed. There is some closure, but part of me was kind of hoping there would be a twist at the end, or Nasty Nork would be a bit more developed. Nevertheless, once the credits end and you've fully completed the game, you can go into the real last level of Spyro 1, Nasty's Loot, which is kind of a mixed bag for me. For one thing, you can fly around the entire area, which is pretty neat, but on the other hand, all you're doing is just collecting gems and killing bandits for no reason. I mean, at this point in the game, the gems have no real value outside of being collectibles, so there's no point of even playing this level. It doesn't feel rewarding in my opinion, but I guess it was fun though, so that's a plus. And there is a special ending where you get to see Spyro wearing sunglasses, but that's about it. In the end, is it worth fully completing Spyro 1? Well, I would say so. You get the most replayability from doing so, and without striving for 100% completion, the game is pretty lackluster. It's simply more entertaining to go for 100% rather than playing the game casually. So overall, I had a lot of fun playing Spyro the Dragon for the PS1. Although it's not mind-blowing or amazing, I still found my experience to be really enjoyable. It makes for a great first installment in the Spyro series, and sets the standard for what works in the Spyro franchise. The non-linear level design and the sheer variety of the stages, the enemies, and the presentation is amazing. Not to mention, Spyro controls really well and has some good general characterization. Once again, it's not mind-blowing, but it sets up Spyro's character for future installments. Despite some camera issues I had, I have no major complaints with the game, but it suffers from something everybody says it suffers from. It's the first game in the series, so it doesn't feel as developed as later games, which is perfectly fine, but it makes Spyro 1 feel just good. If you have a PS1, a PS2, or a PS3, I would highly recommend you find a used copy off Amazon and try the game out. It's inexpensive and the game is short, so it's definitely worth your time. But as always, if you disagree or agree with me, let me know in the comment section below. Regardless, I hope you'll join me sometime next week when we take a look at Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage, or Gateway to Glimmer as it's known in Europe. And thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day and goodbye.
Thank you for releasing
Me.